Good morning, good afternoon. Thank you all so much for joining us. Welcome to today's UNU-INWEH Science Talk. We're so pleased that you could join us for this important session on the UN Sustainable Development Goals 101, an introduction to the SDGs for cities. My name is Dr. Miriam Exel, and I'm thrilled to be your host today. For those of you who are joining us for the first time, we're delighted to have you, and we'd like to let you know that all of our science talks from the 2025 series, as well as the entire 2024 series hosted by the formidable Professor Grace Oluwasanya, is available on our website and our YouTube channel. Our website is unu.edu/INWEH -talks with an S at the end. Today's talk, like all the others, will be recorded, and the video will be made available on our website and on our YouTube channel. I'd also like to remind you that the session will conclude with an interactive question and answer session. So please put your questions in the Q&A box, and I will be sure to read them out to today's speaker. And now I'm delighted to introduce today's speaker, Dr. Rohit Ramchandani. He's a Johns Hopkins trained doctor of public health and a leading global health innovator with over 2 decades of experience designing and scaling life-saving interventions. As an implementation scientist, educator, and advisor, he has worked across sectors to address urgent global health challenges, including childhood diarrhea, malaria, tuberculosis, mental health, and pandemic preparedness, among others. At UNU-INWEH, Dr. Ramchandani focuses on innovation and partnerships to bridge the science policy gap. His work spans behavioral science, health systems, and water security, including the Basin Project, which builds capacity in behavioral-centered design for climate resilience in Africa. He's also the founder and CEO of Antara Global Health Advisors and serves as a principal investigator for the award-winning Cola Life initiative, which leveraged the Coca-Cola supply chain to expand access to oral rehydration, salts, and zinc for children. He's advised the Independent Panel for Pandemic Preparedness and Response, contributed to initiatives at Global Affairs Canada, and has played key roles in multilateral efforts like the TB REACH facility and the G8 Muskoka initiative. Dr. Ramchandani holds academic appointments at Johns Hopkins University, the University of Waterloo, and the Balsillie School of International Affairs. He is a committed mentor, published researcher, and TEDx speaker. His recognitions include the FT IMC Transformational Business Award, London Design Museum's Product of the Year, and a Grand Challenges Canada Rising Stars Award. Now, please join me in welcoming Dr. Ramchandani, and with that, I'll turn it over to you. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Miriam. Well, good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining us today for this SDGs 101 session focused on providing an introduction to the Sustainable Development Goals for cities. My name is Rohit Ramchandani, and I am the Innovation and Strategic Partnerships Officer for the United Nations University Institute for Water, Environment, and Health, also known as UNU-INWEH. Today's session has been designed to introduce city staff from around the world, a multidisciplinary group of professionals working in municipalities from Richmond Hill in Ontario, Canada, to Kigali, Rwanda, to the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. This presentation is a product of an ongoing global municipal partnership on sustainability transitions between UNU-INWEH and our host city of Richmond Hill, which focuses on advancing the city's environmental and sustainability strategies. Over the next 40 minutes or so, we'll explore what the SDGs are, why cities are so central to achieving them, and explore some noteworthy examples of addressing the SDGs from 1 or 2 cities around the world. And so it's my great pleasure to be your guide today as we explore the relevance of and some of the intersections between the SDGs and cities. So I'll begin by providing just a brief introduction to the United Nations University, and more specifically, our Institute for Water, Environment, and Health. UNU-INWEH is one of 13 institutions around the world that make up the United Nations University, which is essentially the academic and research arm of the UN system, headquartered in Tokyo, Japan, and focused on bridging evidence, policy, and practice. And we do this by contributing through collaborative research and education, the best evidence from the international academic community towards policy and practice efforts that are focused on resolving the global grand challenges of human survival, development, and welfare that are essentially the concern of the United Nations, its member states, and their people. UNU is led by a rector who holds the rank of Undersecretary General of the UN. And that position is currently held by our seventh rector, Professor Shilidzi Marwala. Now, at UNU-INWEH, we are the institution focused on tackling humanity's most complex and interconnected water, environment, and health challenges, represented by our current strategic areas of focus listed on the right side of the slide here. And we've been doing that for almost 3 decades, with our work spanning high-impact research and innovation, education and capacity building, as well as policy impact and advocacy. And while we focus on the broader water, environment, and health nexus, we're often referred to as the UN's dedicated think tank on water. And that's because we recognize that water, while fundamental to life itself and certainly a key driver of development, it remains central to the interlinked challenges that are encompassed in the 17 Sustainable Development Goals, which we'll be exploring today. So, what are the Sustainable Development Goals? The SDGs represent a comprehensive blueprint of 17 interconnected goals that were unanimously adopted by all 193 UN member states in September of 2015 as part of the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. Also, I want to emphasize the point about unanimous adoption here, because I'm sure you can imagine, especially within our current global context, that getting 193 countries to unanimously agree on anything is a Herculean task. However, it was universally agreed that these ambitious goals for transforming our world provide a shared framework for governments, businesses, civil society, communities, and individuals to collaborate on addressing our world's most pressing social, economic, and environmental challenges, covering everything from the eradication of poverty to safeguarding our planet's ecosystems to the health and well-being of populations, and ensuring inclusive and equitable prosperity for all people by 2030. And I think there's sometimes a misconception that these goals are targeted at developing countries and not relevant to high-income, so-called developed nations. But this is indeed a misconception. This blueprint for peace and prosperity for people and planet is an urgent call for action for all countries, developing and developed, in a global partnership. The SDGs aren't about aid or fixing others. They are about shared global challenges and mutual responsibilities. They are a basis for cooperation and multilateralism, and purposefully, they were designed that way. The fact is that no country has finished the job of sustainable development. And in fact, if anything, high-income countries have a disproportionate global impact, accounting for a majority of global carbon emissions, driving global consumption and supply chains, and often influencing global trade, finance, and governance systems. And so without addressing the systemic contributions from these nations, progress on the global goals is impossible. So these certainly are not North versus South issues. The SDGs are a mirror, and they help reflect both our global challenges as well as our local blind spots. The SDGs were developed through one of the largest global consultation processes in UN history. They evolved from the Millennium Development Goals and are the product of collaboration across governments, subject matter experts, civil society, the private sector, and local communities from every corner of the world, including over 7 million citizens. This participatory approach ensures that the SDGs reflect the interconnected challenges that are facing humanity today. And this is certainly reflected in how the SDGs have been operationalized across different geographies and contexts to form an internationally recognized set of goals and targets which aim to promote development in the economy, environment, and society. Together, the 17 goals consist of 169 specific targets and over 230 key performance indicators for measuring our progress in objective and quantifiable ways. And together, they have galvanized the world's collective action. Just to give you a sense of how the goals break down to targets and specific measurable indicators, let's zoom in on those associated with Goal 6 to ensure availability and sustainability management of water and sanitation for all, which has 8 targets and 11 indicators. The targets specify the goals, while indicators represent the metrics by which the world aims to track whether these targets are being achieved or not. So the indicator for target 6.1, which is to achieve universal and equitable access to safe and affordable drinking water for all by 2030, is the proportion of the population using safely managed drinking water services, where safely managed drinking water services is defined as an improved source located on premises, available when needed, and free from fecal and priority chemical contamination. Those are things like E. coli or other pathogens, arsenic, fluoride as examples. So the level of specificity and detailed guidance for defining and tracking SDG-related data is quite advanced. If we look at another example, let's use part of Target 6.4 as an example, to ensure sustainable withdrawals and supply of fresh water to address water scarcity and substantially reduce the number of people suffering from water scarcity. The indicator for that target is 642, the level of water stress, which is defined as freshwater withdrawals as a proportion of available freshwater resources. If we explore these indicators further, these graphs show global heat maps relating to indicators 611 and 642. From 2015 to 2024, the population using safely managed drinking water increased from 68 to 74% globally. However, as reflected by the map on the left, globally, we still have 2.1 billion people without access to safely managed drinking water, most significantly in the global south. Similarly, 3.4 billion people live without safely managed sanitation, and 1.7 billion live without basic hygiene services. This is a global public health and development crisis with billions of people still lacking access to the most fundamental human needs: clean water, sanitation, hygiene, wash. And the implications are severe for health, increasing the spread of waterborne diseases like cholera and typhoid and diarrhea, which is the second leading cause of infectious mortality in children under 5 globally. For gender equality, disproportionately impacting women and girls who often bear the burden of water collection and face safety risks due to inadequate sanitation. For education and productivity, affecting school attendance, especially for girls during menstruation, and reducing time for work and studying, as well as for climate resilience, undermining the ability of communities to adapt to climate-related water stress and disasters. The map on the right classifies water stress, the ratio between total fresh water withdrawn by all major sectors of the economy, as I mentioned before, right? That includes agriculture, industry, as well as domestic use, that ratio to the total renewable freshwater resources that are available. And it divides it into 5 classes where less than 25% means no stress, 25 to 50% means low stress, 50 to 75% means medium stress, and 75 to 100% means high stress. More than 100%, shown in red, means critical stress. So there are currently countries in the world that are experiencing critical water stress. The map on the right classifies water stress according to those 5 categories. And here we can see that water stress varies significantly across regions, with Northern Africa and Western Asia, as well as Southern and Central Asia, facing extreme scarcity. You can also see the differences that exist within North America, where it's not just about physical scarcity, but increasingly about political tension and potential governance risk. Take the Columbia River, for example. It starts in British Columbia, Canada, and flows down into the US, powering about 40% of America's hydroelectric generation. For decades, a treaty has governed how that water is shared and ensuring flood control, electricity, and fair benefit on both sides. But in 2024, those negotiations were suddenly paused. Why? Because the US, under new leadership, began threatening to dismantle key agreements with Canada, even referring to the border as imaginary and joking about the large faucet in BC that could be turned on to solve California's drought. These comments and the stalled treaty reveal the fragility of even long-standing cooperative water sharing arrangements and highlight just how geopolitically vulnerable water security can become, even in high-income countries. Now, this graphic from colleagues at Our World in Data, which is a collaborative effort between researchers at the University of Oxford and the not-for-profit Global Change Data Lab. It's an attempt to capture which of the approximately 230 SDG indicators actually had good data available back in 2018. This indicator is, or rather the indicators in green had recent global official metrics that were available, or at least good quality alternatives from other sources. The ones marked in yellow were indicators that had official metrics, but for which available data was very incomplete or outdated. And the indicators marked in red didn't have global monitoring or comparable data available. And you can see that while data was available for many indicators, there were still significant gaps. But the good news is that we've had significant advancements since this graphic was developed back in 2018. And that is the power of the SDG framework. Because if we can objectively measure these things with data, we're subject to the whims, but if we can't objectively measure these things with data, we're subject to the whims and potential mis and disinformation being fed to us by interest groups, ideologues, or even well-meaning but misinformed actors. But with a clear shared set of indicators and targets, we can hold ourselves and our governments accountable, see where our systems have gaps, track real progress, and make evidence-based decisions to improve lives and protect the planet. Now, I did a comparison of the indicators that fell into the green, yellow, and red categories in 2018, today referred to as tier 1, 2, and 3, and compared them to our situation today. And like I said, we've seen significant progress. The number of tier 1 indicators with reliable data grew by over 68% from 2018 to 2025. Today, 157 of the indicators would be green. The number of indicators falling into tier 3 was actually eliminated completely by 2020, meaning that all indicators now have defined methodologies, and more than 51% of indicators in more than half of all countries have good data trends. That means at least 2 data points since 2015, which reflects a major statistical milestone globally. But that said, data coverage certainly remains an issue. While tier 2 indicators, those with established methods but no regular produced data, decreased slightly, 66 indicators still lack sufficient country-level data, particularly in areas like disaggregated data by age, gender, income, geography, environmental impacts as well as governance and peace-related metrics. And while there's been a significant progress on the data quality and collection front, the story that these metrics paint, I'm sorry to say, is deeply troubling. So how do we know where the world stands on the SDGs? Each year, the United Nations Secretary General presents the annual SDG Progress Report, developed in collaboration with the UN system. It's based on global indicators, national statistics, and regional data. Essentially, it's our global dashboard for sustainable development. But the real centerpiece for global accountability is the high-level political forum on sustainable development, or the HLPF. This is the UN's main platform for reviewing SDG progress and driving collective action. It happens every July, is hosted by the UN Economic and Social Council, and every 4 years, it's elevated to the level of heads of state and government and what's called the SDG Summit. The HLPF isn't just a government affair. It brings together ministers, UN leaders, researchers, civil society, the private sector, and local governments. It also includes something called voluntary national reviews, or VNRs, where countries are able to share their progress, the successes, the gaps, and yes, the hard lessons. And increasingly, cities are stepping onto that stage through local reviews and partnerships, showing how progress or failure is playing out on the ground. This year, HLPF is actually just a few weeks away and will run from July 14th to 23rd with a focus on evidence-based, inclusive solutions and leaving no one behind. This year, the forum will take a deep dive into SDGs 3, good health, 5, gender equality, 8, decent work, 14, life below water, and 17, partnerships, all of which are deeply relevant for urban centers. So let's take a look at where we stand today in achieving the SDGs and why this matters so much for cities. The 2024 SDG Progress Report reveals a sobering truth. Only 17% of SDG targets are currently on track to be achieved by 2030. Nearly half are showing only moderate or minimal progress, and over 1/3 have either stalled or actually regressed, slipping below 2015 levels. You can see this breakdown in the bar graph in the first column here. These aren't just statistics, right? They reflect real setbacks in the lives of people, in the health of ecosystems, and in the resilience of our cities. Much of the early momentum we saw in the SDG era has essentially been derailed since 2009. The COVID-19 pandemic, escalating conflicts, economic fragmentation, trade disruption, and the growing toll of the climate crisis have all hit hard, especially in the world's most vulnerable regions. In just a few years, 23 million more people have fallen into extreme poverty, and 123 million more are suffering from hunger. Income gaps are widening, especially between the poorest and the richest. And in cities, this inequality shows up as deepening housing insecurity, food deserts, and climate vulnerability. Progress on global health has slowed, with education systems faltering. Just 58% of children worldwide meet basic reading benchmarks by the end of primary school. And 1 in 5 youth are not in school. They're not in school, they're not in training or in work. These challenges have serious implications for the future of innovation, equity, and urban labor markets, the majority of which will be comprised of youth residing in Africa and Asia. That is where the working population is going to be. Gender equality remains elusive. Women and girls still face persistent barriers in leadership, employment, and safety. Without bold action, we will fall short not only on SDG 5 on gender equality, but on the entire 2030 vision, because gender justice, and particularly the empowerment of women, is foundational to all progress. On climate and biodiversity, the outlook is also dire. Despite some emission cuts in high-income countries, greenhouse gas concentrations hit record highs in 2022 and are still rising. Carbon dioxide levels are now 150% above pre-industrial levels. Ocean acidification is worsening, and species extinction risk is growing rapidly. And cities, especially coastal ones, are on the front lines of these planetary crises. And to this, add to this, rather, a world where conflict and forced displacement have essentially surged, right? With 110 million people displaced globally and 72% increase in civilian casualties from armed conflict over the past year. Yes. There are glimmers of hope. Progress continues on reducing infant mortality, expanding access to water, energy, mobile broadband, and cutting the cost of remittances. And many countries and cities are showing real leadership in advancing SDG transformation at the local level. The 2023 SDG Summit reaffirmed a powerful message. Governments remain united behind the 2030 agenda, but solidarity is not enough. We need speed, we need scale, and we need action. That means three big shifts: peace, ending the conflicts that are driving displacement and destabilizing development, financing, creating fiscal space and a fairer international financial system, especially for developing countries, and transitions, which investing in energy, food, digital access, and social protections while transforming education and jobs for the future. Sorry. Cities are central to all three of these strategic directions. They are where the investments, innovations, and institutional reforms have to take root. They're where inclusion can happen or exclusion can deepen. And they are where the SDGs become real. So the takeaway is clear. The world is severely off track, but transformation is still possible. And cities hold the power and are a critical part of the responsibility to turn the tide. So let's take a deeper look at the role of cities in sustainable development. Cities are hubs for ideas, commerce, culture, science, and productivity, as well as social, environmental, and economic development more broadly. Urban planning, transport systems, water, sanitation, waste management, disaster mitigation, access to information, education, and capacity building. These are all relevant issues to sustainable urban development. And the SDG that most directly addresses cities is SDG 11 for sustainable cities and communities. Goal 11 is about making cities and human settlements accessible, inclusive, safe, resilient, and sustainable. Why? Because cities are the future of global living. The world's population hit 8 billion in 2022, and more than half of us now live in cities. By 2050, nearly 70% of the global population will call a city home. But many cities aren't ready. Urbanization is accelerating faster than our ability to build the housing, the infrastructure, and the public services needed to support them. That's why today over 1.1 billion people live in slums or slum-like conditions, and that number could nearly triple in the next 30 years. Cities only take about 3% of the Earth's surface, but they account for 60 to 80% of global energy use and around 75% of carbon emissions. They're also on the front lines of inequality, pollution, and climate risk, particularly in small and rapidly growing towns across the global south. Despite the challenges, we've made progress. Since the SDGs were adopted in 2015, the number of countries with national and local disaster risk reduction strategies has doubled, but more needs to be done. In 2022, only half of the urban population had convenient access to public transport. Sprawl continues to outpace smart growth. Air pollution remains a health crisis, and too many people still lack access to safe public spaces. Why does this matter? Because if cities fail, we will all feel it, whether it's through air quality, rising housing costs, traffic gridlock, economic stagnation, or social unrest. Cities are where inequality, climate change, and public health collide, but they're also where some of the most powerful solutions can come from. Poorly planned cities lead to slums, traffic chaos, and environmental degradation. But well-planned, inclusive cities create jobs. They improve health. They strengthen communities, and they reduce emissions, often at a lower cost than we actually think. Take public transport. It may require investment up front, but the long-term gains in productivity, in air quality, and quality of life have been shown to be significant. So what can each of us do? We can start by becoming more engaged in the governance of our communities. We can ask questions like, are there enough jobs near where people live? Is the air clean? Can our kids walk to school safely? How accessible is public transport? What does your public space look like? The more we shape our neighborhoods with intention, the more we contribute to the broader success of our cities and of SDG 11. Let's take a closer look at where we are today in terms of sustainable cities and communities. As I noted previously, in 2022, 1.12 billion people lived in slums or slum-like conditions, 130 million more than in 2015. That's nearly a quarter of the world's urban population. Sub-Saharan Africa has the highest share, where over 53% of city dwellers live in slums. And unless we act now, the region is projected to add 360 million more slum dwellers by 2030. Globally, 6 in 10 people in cities have convenient access to public transport, but this hides deep inequality. In the least developed countries, it's just 4 in 10, while in richer regions, it's 8 in 10. So access needs to be expanded urgently, especially in poor and underserved urban neighborhoods. Another growing challenge is urban sprawl. Between 2000 and 2020, cities expanded up to 3.7 times faster than they grew denser. So they expanded faster than they grew denser. That means more land is being taken up, often at the expense of nature, without increasing the number of people per square kilometer. Sprawl averaged 5.6% per year, while densification lagged at just 1.5%. From 2015 to 2022, disasters damaged over 100,000 critical infrastructure units each year. They disrupted over 1.6 million basic services like schools and clinics annually. Cities must become more resilient, especially as climate change disasters accelerate. There's one bright spot. Since the SDGs were launched, fine particulate air pollution has dropped globally by 9%, aligning with the WHO's first interim target. That's progress, but we have a long way to go to ensure healthy air for all. Access to green and open public space remains deeply unequal. In the least developed countries, fewer than 3 in 10 urban residents can easily reach a public park or a green space. In wealthier regions, it's closer to 6 or 7 in 10. There's also promising news on local governance. 106 countries now report that local disaster reduction strategies are in place. And on average, 72% of local governments in those countries have adopted them in line with national strategies. So cities are where the SDGs converge. And SDG 11 reflects the full complexity of what's at stake. From housing and transit to air quality and disaster resilience, cities need integrated, people-centered strategies to thrive. And the time to act is now, before sprawl and inequality outpace our solutions. So as we start to just wrap up here, I wanted to share a couple of sample case studies from cities around the world that are addressing different SDGs in bold and novel ways. There are many examples from many parts of the world. So the ones presented here are just meant to be a sample. I would encourage you to check out initiatives like the C40 Cities Initiative, the World Urban Pavilion and World Urban Forum, and others for more examples, because there are numerous innovations, really powerful work taking place in cities all over the world. The first case studies I wanted to present focus on zero emission areas. As cities around the world work to curb emissions and improve urban quality of life, zero emission areas, or ZEAs, are emerging as a bold transformational solution. These zones are not just about reducing tailpipe pollution. They're comprehensive strategies that reshape how people move, how people breathe, and how people live in cities. By definition, ZEAs aim for zero tailpipe greenhouse gas emissions from all trips within a designated urban area, including walking, cycling, public transit, and zero emission vehicles like electric or hydrogen powered cars and trucks. But ZEAs go far beyond vehicles. They prioritize health and equity, safety, and economic vibrancy while helping cities meet their climate goals. More than 35 cities worldwide, through the Green and Healthy Streets Declaration, have committed to establishing major ZEAs by 2030. Let's look at how 2 cities, Amsterdam and Barcelona, are already leading the way. Amsterdam has long been a global leader in sustainable mobility. This is the top image on the right is the ZEA space in Amsterdam. Famous for its extensive bike lanes, walkable streets, and high transit use, Amsterdam is, however, now going even further with an ambitious plan. By 2030, the entire city will become a zero emission area. The city began in 2020 by banning diesel vehicles in the city center. By 2025, that's this year, all traffic with within that A10 ring road that you can see on the map, including taxis, ferries, and pleasure boats, must be emission-free, excluding private cars and motorbikes. By 2030, all motorized traffic throughout Amsterdam will need to be zero emission. So this transition is being supported by a massive investment in EV charging infrastructure, including smarter, demand-responsive charging networks, subsidies and incentives to help residents and businesses shift to clean transport, strict regulations phasing out polluting vehicles and expanding low-emission zones outward in these kind of concentric circles, and importantly, a public campaign that engages citizens and communicates the personal and environmental benefits of clean air. Barcelona is taking a different but equally innovative path. In January of 2020, it established a 95 square kilometer low emission zone to regulate the entry of high polluting vehicles. Over the next decade, the city plans to gradually tighten restrictions to phase out fossil fuel vehicles entirely by 2030. But what really sets Barcelona apart is its visionary urban redesign strategy, the superblocks. Superblocks are 400 by 400 meter grids of city streets where cars are largely excluded. Within these zones, pedestrians, cyclists, and public space take precedence, radically shifting the balance from cars to people. Once complete, Barcelona will reallocate over 750 hectares of its streets to public space, up from just 74, transforming 70% of the city's roads. The city is also making sustainable mobility attractive through progressive fare structures for public transport, discounts and incentives for electric and low emission vehicles, including for taxis and freight, toll and parking reductions, and the expansion of high occupancy vehicle lanes. A transition of municipal fleets as well to clean fuels and a continuous investment in cycling and public transit infrastructure. So both cities show that ZEAs are not just about removing emissions, they're about reimagining urban life. They offer cleaner air, safer streets, stronger local economies, and a better quality of life for all. And critically, they help cities align with the goals of the Paris Agreement, showing what's possible when long-term vision is paired with policy, investment, and public engagement. Cities everywhere can draw lessons from these leaders because the path to zero emissions is also the path to healthier and more livable communities. This will be my last slide. And, as we come to a close, I just want to bring us back to one of the most vital takeaways of this entire agenda. And that is that the SDGs are not a checklist. They're a living system. And to navigate them, we need to think like systems thinkers. Let's return to using water as a lens for understanding this idea for a moment. At first glance, it may seem like water might seem like a technical or an environmental issue, but zoom out just a bit and the interconnections become very clear. As the global population rises from just over 8 billion to 8.5 billion by 2050, especially in developing regions, demand for water will skyrocket, not just for drinking, but for food, for energy, industry, and for daily living. And where will most of these people live? In cities. Urban areas are at the front lines of this transformation. Cities already consume over 2/3 of global energy. They generate the majority of emissions and concentrate both opportunity and vulnerability. From increasing water demand to waste management, food systems, and public health, cities are where SDGs progress or failure will be most visible and most felt. In regions like Europe and North America, over 90% of a person's water footprint is typically indirect. That means it's embedded in agriculture, food, and consumer products, especially those with high water intensity, like meat and dairy, coffee, and processed goods. And as urban diets shift towards more water-intensive consumption patterns, the strain on ecosystems and water systems will intensify. To meet these demands, we're clearing forests, we're degrading land, and we're polluting waterways, which then feeds back into climate change, biodiversity loss, and rising disaster risk, especially in densely populated deltas and coastal cities. Here's where the interconnectedness and trade-offs become critical. The SDGs are filled with feedback loops. Progress on one can either uplift or undermine another. For example, a recent UNU-INWEH study shows that expanding irrigation improves child nutrition, a great outcome for SDG 2, zero hunger, and SDG 3, good health and well-being. But paradoxically, the greatest gains are happening in regions already suffering severe water stress. So we're solving one problem, but possibly deepening another. That's the kind of trade-off that can't be ignored. And it's why systems thinking isn't just helpful, it's essential. Now, nowhere is this more important than in cities, which sit at the intersection of every SDG, from poverty and inequality to clean energy, mobility, water, climate resilience. Cities aren't just places where the challenges manifest. They're also powerful systems laboratories for integrated solutions, innovation, and inclusive governance. If we approach the SDGs in silos, we risk chasing progress that either is unsustainable or exclusive. But if we embrace an integrated, feedback-aware mindset, we can design solutions that are mutually reinforcing and more circular, like urban policies that connect water governance with food systems, with climate resilience, with social equity, and with health. So this final message is simple but powerful. The SDGs are deeply interconnected. Cities are where this interconnection becomes real. And systems thinking is the key to unlocking their full potential. Systems thinking gets improved through partnership, and not just to avoid unintended consequences, but to seize the synergies that can truly transform our world. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Rohit. That was really fantastic. Thank you so much for walking us through and demystifying the Sustainable Development Goals, and for putting it in the context of cities. I think this is both really uplifting and important work. And you also made me think of, I love a good book recommendation, and you mentioned the low emission zone. And I recently read former mayor of London, England, Sadiq Khan's Breathe, Tackling the Climate Emergency. And he talks about how he personally got, sort of became a climate mayor after being diagnosed in his 40s with asthma and sort of discovering the bad air pollution in London and the development of the ultra low emission zone in London. So recommendation for anyone that's interested. Also, I wanted to ask, I really like how you say that partnerships are kind of the key to systems thinking. And I'm wondering, from your perspective, are there particular partnerships, either across sectors or across borders, that you think are key to SDG success?
Absolutely. Many different stakeholders, and so many different models of partnership. And so we can talk about public-private partnerships. We can talk about academic, municipal partnerships. Some of the ones that we're focusing on a lot right now at UNU-INWEH, in fact, kind of strengthen and are based around academic and city partnerships. So UNU-INWEH has 4 different hubs, UNU-INWEH hubs, all based at different universities around the world, all with different areas of expertise relating to water, environment, and health. So, for example, at the City College of New York, we have a UNU hub on remote, I'm going to get the name wrong now, but, and Kavi will scold me for this, but on surveillance, remote monitoring and surveillance. And through partnerships with the City of New York, as an example, they have been using remote sensing and imaging technology to help the city predict where floods will have the greatest impact. So this type of expertise that sits within academia and the ability to bring that to policymakers at city or national levels or at international multilateral levels, I think is critical. And so public-private partnerships, another great example. You know, we're seeing what the funding environment for sustainable development looks like, and the trends are not thrilling, you know. And so the role of novel types of partnerships is going to be really crucial. And so public-private partnerships are just one example of that, where you know, I'll give you an example. We've had the opportunity to work on what are called product development partnerships, PDPs, and in areas where there is market failure for certain products, vaccines, therapeutics, diagnostics for diseases that largely affect the poor, you get this kind of market failure taking place because you don't have companies coming in. The big pharmaceutical companies won't come in to develop those particular products. And so the PDP model is a mechanism that pools public funding through different donor agencies around the world to conduct the R&D and support the R&D work up front in a traditional kind of pharmaceutical model, where you have, you know, clinical trials, you have different candidates moving through clinical trials, and once it gets far enough along in the development process, then big pharma will come in, and business, the private sector will come in, partner to kind of take it the rest of the way. So it's a de-risking mechanism that has really resulted in a number of new vaccines, therapeutics, and diagnostics for neglected tropical diseases.
I also think that the acronym that you're looking for is RSIRUS, SIRUS, for the initiative at City College. And I'll pass it over to you.
Thank you.
Oh, okay. Rohit, you know I'll come for you, but in a good way. So let me start by saying I believe all this should be packaged into a flagship report. You know, so fingers crossed for you on that. But I want to pick you up on one of the things you said, especially again, don't say typical gray. Gender justice is from the foundational to human development. You know, that's quoting you directly. So that, you know, by default, will catch my attention. You know, so I'm wondering, from your perspective, given, you know, that you have this overview now of SDGs, this appears to be a very powerful, you know, statement and really fundamental to development. We're really very serious about it. But again, unfortunately, at a time like this, we're having, you know, a situation where the word alone, talk less of the context behind it, is pretty much being, maybe for political reasons or whatever, being demystified or, you know, just being pulled out. So from your vantage point of having gone through an overview of the SDG, you know, how do you see we going forward on this?
Yeah. I think it is up to organizations like ours to really make sure that we are sharing the evidence base around why gender is important and why it makes a difference in the lives of families and children and individuals, right? Like, and communities, of course, at large. I think one of the things that the SDGs does really well is kind of demonstrate the importance and the power of data. It gives us insights into how to make better decisions. It gives us insight into where we are succeeding and where we are failing. And as an example, gender disaggregated data I mentioned, that type of insight is critical, because if you don't have that type of data available to make decisions and to get a good picture of what's happening, we're going to make the wrong decisions, and we're going to make uninformed decisions. And the fact is that the last, number of decades, we've improved on starting to gather this type of data, and that has resulted in really powerful insights that, for example, in WASH, water, sanitation, and hygiene, when our programs work with caregivers and mothers at the community level, and they're the ones who are taking leadership roles and being trained in water, sanitation, and hygiene, when mothers are the ones who hold the economic power, the purse strings, if you will, in a family, the decisions that get made benefit the family. They're in the best interests of the family. And we've seen that, and that's clear in the data. And so when there are movements to get rid of that and kind of create or recreate those blind spots, we have to question why. We have to question, what we're going to lose, and it weakens us in terms of making better decisions. So that's how I'd answer that question.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for the insightful presentation. I just would like to know your opinion about, because you mentioned the interconnection between different goals. So I'd like to know your opinion about some principles that may not be directly related to urban sustainability, but are fundamental principles, such as Principle 16, Rule 16, access to justice. So what's the connection between these principles, particularly this particular goal, and urban sustainability?
I think when you don't have a just society, when you don't have the policies in place to ensure access and equity for everyone, you create you create problems in society, and those problems manifest in many different ways. Most importantly, they affect individual lives, and I think when we have let's take the example of disability access. If we think about justice from an access standpoint, at the municipal level, at a city level, you have one city that ensures accessibility, to public transportation. And, I need to take public transport. Do I have, a mechanism to get my wheelchair into the bus? One city has that, one city does not. Those are fundamentally different in terms of the justice that is experienced by the individual. So I think the interplay between policy and kind of sustainable design really needs to take justice into consideration. We could look at something like mental health. Not a lot of good solutions out there in terms of the innovations and the therapies that we currently have access to. There are novel therapies that are being researched and are emerging. So, there are big questions right now from a justice standpoint around, how do you make those decisions? How do you let evidence kind of lead those decisions and those processes, as opposed to, other influences that might be there. So, yeah, these are all quite questions of justice, I think.
Thank you so much for a really fantastic and insightful and inspiring presentation. We really are grateful to you for walking us through the SDGs, and for all of those who joined us online. Thank you so much for making this part of your day. We are looking forward to seeing you again next week. Thank you very much, and we'll see you next week.
Thank you.